we will start with our topic, which is going to be taking a look at contour cut workflow. So some of the basics that we want to accomplish here is going to first start out at the rip with getting some things established and set up. Specifically for contour cut, we're going to need to have a quick set created that will identify the cutter model as well as the cut path name. And this name is going to be referenced from the design file. We will then, after we make that quick set, we will then go into cut server and we will add that cutter and set up some of the specifications for communication in cut server. We'll take a little look at the manage cutter settings and let you explore and see what options we have to control for that cutter model. And then we will go into the Illustrator program and we will take a look at setting up the cut information, the spot color information for the cut path. So we're going to go through those steps, and that will be our cut workflow. We'll take a look at sending a few sample files through, and you'll get the idea of how the workflow is applied. So to begin with, I'm going to start by creating the quick set. To do that, up in my toolbar, I'm in the rip queue, I'm going to select on Configure Printer. So you can see my first tab is my quick sets tab. I'm going to make a new quick set. Now this is going to be specific to my cutter model. So if I take a look at the middle left-hand section, you'll see cutter options, and there is a bit of an outline around this shape. For my contour cut selection, it defaults to none, no cutter, but we will make a selection here, and I'm going to choose very simple Graphtec cutter. As you can see, there are a multitude of cutter models that we support. And at any time, if you're wondering about a specific cutter model, if it is supported by ONYX, possibly a printer device, you can always take a look at our website. And in our website, we have a list of supported devices, printers, cutter models, or color devices, which are our spectrophotometers supported. So you can always take a look at this list and see what devices are supported. So I've got back in my quick set, I've got my contour cutter selection made as a Graphtec cutter. I'm now going to give this new quick set an appropriate name, which is going to be for my Graphtec cutter. Now, some parameters and settings we have below are going to relate to the cutter options. By default, the checkbox is on for use cutter path prefix. And you'll see a series of names in here. When I select on this gear, I can configure those cutter path prefix options. And you'll notice everything is checked on by default. In the case where a name of how you would identify your contour cut path is not in this list above, you would be able to hit this plus symbol below and add that custom name. So I'm going to add our commonly used cut contour name to that directory. And then I'll click OK. So the options are available. You can activate or disable which cut path names you want to identify and associate. The idea behind this is when we get into Illustrator, we will be making a spot color identifying the shape of that cut path with that spot color. And that spot color name must match one of these names that are identified here. So if there's a commonly used cut style method that you want to identify that's not in this list, again, hitting that plus symbol lets you add that cutter path name. Now, the next two choices below are very specific and independent. The first choice, add PDF trim box to cut paths. When I activate that feature, first I must be ripping a PDF file in order for this feature to work. So what will take place is the PDF's trim box will automatically be designated as a cut path. So when that is checked on, it's a very convenient setting, shortcut, if you will, that you can activate, and you don't have to create anything in that case. It's just going to automatically be doing those settings for you. Again, specific to PDF. The second option choice we have is generate tile outline cut paths. And if I check that on and click on the gear, which is the options for that particular setting, when I'm working with a tile job, my job is going to engage in using tiling. Tiling is on, tiling is active. It's going to take the outline of that tile and designate that as a cut path. Here I can specify if I should use the original image edge as that cut path placement, the bleed edge, or the trim box edge. In addition, I could type in and enter in a value to just choke or reduce that size overall. I could tell it to include the print label as well as the trim overlap, should I be using the overlap feature in tiling. And then I can also designate here and identify what will be the layer name for that tile outline. So again, optional settings that we have specific to the first choice, a PDF, the trim box will be added as a cut path, or the second choice, the tile workflow, the outline will automatically be designated as a cut path. So two very different, unique optional settings. Okay, so basically set, I've got my new quick set. I've selected my cutter model, identified the name that's going to be the command for the cut path, the feature for the cut path. So any spot color, I make an illustrator with these names, and then take that spot color and identify the shape. Is going to come over to this quick set and use that information to go to our cut server. So this is basically what I need to have set. I'm going to go ahead and click OK and OK again. So now I have a cutter configured here specifically for the quick set. If you have more than one cutter model, besides GraphTech, you've got a Suma or a Zund or some other device, you would just continue and make another new quick set for that specific model. So I'm going to go with this model and I'll click OK. So that's the first thing I need to do, is establish a quick set that's identifying my cutter model as well as my settings for the spot color name of that cut path. Secondly, I'm going to go up in my toolbar here and I'm going to launch Cut Server. Since I will be sending from Cut Server to the GraphTech Cutter, I need to add the GraphTech Cutter to my Cut Server software. You'll notice as my Cut Server software launches, and let's say this is the first time you're launching it, you have not established any previous cutter models. Well, here we can see the convenience of this menu, adding a cutter. In the pull down at the top, I will select my GraphTech Cutter. When we get into this, sometimes the specifications are here where it is the full detailed name. So I'm going to select my GraphTech FC8600 and I'll click OK. Now that cutter model has been added to Cut Server. We can see that on the left column. We do need to establish a few settings within here for communication to the physical GraphTech Cutter. So I'm going to hit the gear in the upper right corner of that GraphTech model and also see Configure Cutter. Besides this, I can also go back into Manage Cutters and Configure. The very first item we see is our method for communicating to the cutter. This is going to be our physical connection. In some cases, the GraphTech Cutter may be communicating by TCP/IP, or possibly you've got a USB cable. Again, depending on the method for the specific cutter model, we will choose the appropriate connection type. I will leave mine as a cut to file for demonstration purposes, as this is going to default to my RIPS folder inside the cutter folder, I will then be seeing a GraphTech cutter folder generated for that model. And inside there will be my cut files. So I'm going to leave that default there as demonstration purposes. In the real world, you'll select the method that you're communicating and then click on Setup and configure that setting. Now you see a few other choices. You've got this auto forwarding option. And if we turn that on, as soon as a cut file comes into Cut Server, this command being checked on will automatically send it to the GraphTech cutter computer, the hard drive that's on board to that cutter. So it's going to automatically forward the file to that location. Maybe this is something that works well. It's going to be sent over there immediately, or maybe you're planning on cutting this later in the day. So this is an option that you may or may not turn on, given the communication style, if you want to have that information over there right away or send it at your leisure. If we're working with a type of flatbed cutter that has a front-end computer, we may be sending the file across our network to that computer. And in that case, we may want to automatically forward the file and let the file be transferred through our network. It's going to be at that computer directory that we browse to in our setting above. A few more options we have: filter cut jobs by device. Should you happen to have more than one of that cutter, GraphTech cutter model, we can specify to sort by device. So maybe I have one for an FC8600. Maybe I have one that's an FC8000, 7000. I can specify by those devices specifically here. And then a last option at the bottom is our cut layer settings. Again, these choices are optional as you wish to choose them. We can add the cut layer settings, and then based on the spot layer name for the cut path, this information is going to come over to associate a specific cut tool type. So I'll do this as demonstration purposes. I'm going to make this as cut contour. And then you have choices in this case to use whatever conditions are loaded at the cutter, or choose a specific condition, or use specific settings. Every cutter model will have their own individual menu here of controls based on what that model will offer. I'm just going to set this condition 2 as an example, and I'll name my cut path information, my special cut name, as cut contour. I could add more and select more cut information. So if I had another setting that was going to be for a score, I might say that that's using condition 3. I might have another option that's going to be for a through cut, or however. And again, optional settings, you can control that. What will happen, and you'll see this when we go through the steps, is the spot color that's placed on its own layer from Illustrator, named as such, cut contour or score, will be brought over to the appropriate layer here. It's going to match that up by name. There is a layer order to this. What will happen first, what will happen second, third, and last. If the term cut contour is representing the cut to go completely through the material, and score is meant to represent just the surface to, cut through at the very center, what we might do then is move that score, that light cut that doesn't go all the way through the material, to take place before the cut contour, which may be a completely through cut scenario all the way through the material. This order will be the order that the cut sequencing will take place. So we would want to do all of our light score cuts first, and then follow up secondly, if I had 2 cut paths, follow up secondly with the hard through cut all the way through the material. Okay, so we can control those settings here. All right, so that's my configuration for my cutter. I'll hit close. Now my cut server is set with my GraphTech cutter model identified. So I've got my quick set for the GraphTech cutter, so that when I rip my file, using that, it knows to pick up information based on those spot names for the cut data. Here in Cut Server, I have my landing point for my cut path information to be brought to. So now let's take a look at bringing in a file. In the samples folder of the RIP software, we do have a cutting folder, and inside there is a cut contour sample. And so if you ever want to test your workflow, test your quick set, test your cut server and communication to the device, but you didn't have a file designed, you can always use this setting and test your workflow. I'll select cut contour sample. I will choose my quick set for that GraphTech cutter, so very important. I'll bring that in with the open command. And my file is going to come into the RIP. And once my RIP is completed, I'll be able to see through my series of tabs across the top. There's one that I have active called Cutter, and below I can see that, yes, in fact, this has the GraphTech cutter model associated to it. In this particular cutter style, this is a tabletop roll-to-roll cutter, so I'm going to feed my sheet in, and it's going to be rolling the sheet up and back and through to cut. In that case, I may want to work on my placement strategy. I'll click on my gear to configure. I may want to center my work as well as give a few additional inches for the lead edge and the tail edge of the sheet. These offsets are going to be additional media space without any imageable area to them. And this, I would say, check with the manufacturer's suggestion as far as how much space we need. I'll put in 2 inches for now. This is going to give a little extra lead and tail end of media so that when the sheet is going through the cutter, if it gets to the end, either end of the sheet, it doesn't run out of material. For example, if the cut imaging area is close to the edge of that sheet. And then, of course, I'm going to center it, which is just going to be basically the sweet spot on my roll of material. So now I'll see that update take place. And then I'll have that information for a little bit of a lead edge and a little bit of a tail edge for my particular workflow here. Okay, so now I've got my settings, and you can see the additional gray space for the lead edge and the tail edge as well, just giving a little extra space. So the workflow is going to show me my GraphTech cutter model under cutter. It is normal for us to not see in this print preview the cutter marks because we don't see marks as they are going to be represented. We're not going to see any of the cut path data because that's not going to print. That cut information around all of these shapes should really be the cut control information that goes to Cut Server. So at this point, I'm going to hit print now. This file will be sent to my printer. And if I go into Cut Server, my cut path information will come over here. So in Cut Server, I can see my file name. I can see my randomly generated alphanumeric barcode name, my file size, the particular media profile that was used, as well as the date and timestamp. When I select this file, I will now see my cut path data. Over on the right side, because I did configure, I'll go back into that screen to show you, because I did configure a cut layer setting here to be cut contour, and this particular file has a spot color called cut contour 1, cut contour 2.1, and cut contour 2. This information's coming up in that display. Now, if I hover over those areas, we can see where those cut paths are. They illuminate in that green color. If I click on the objects, I can see them represented as this purple color. So again, we can always see what that cut path information is going to be. At this point, our print is printing. When the print is completed, I would take that print over to my GraphTech cutter, feed that in to my cutter appropriately. The print will have the cut marks with a directional arrow, feed direction arrow. And so we'll be feeding that into the cutter. When it identifies the mark location and it's ready, we will select at the bottom of the screen, cut now, to send this information over to the cutter itself. So now we're transferring the information over to the cutter, and that is beginning to do the cutting. And again, based on that sequencing order, what will be first, second, or third. So that's a simple workflow as far as the scenario goes. So let's take a look at setting up a file in Illustrator and going through the design steps and then using this through our cut workflow as well. So I've got this very simple file, just a few graphic shapes. The intent is that we're going to print these shapes, and then around each of these shapes will be a cut path exactly to that shape size, right, where that object is going to be. So the first thing I need to do is make a new spot color swatch. This must be a spot color. The name is going to represent the cut path. So what were the names that I identified in the quick set? Pop back in here really quickly to remind you and show you. These are the names that I've given for any of my cut information. So this is going to be the name of the spot color in Illustrator. Any of these name types that I'm going to work with. So back in Illustrator. So I'll go with our typical contour. And the color is not really going to matter so much as it is a display color. Some people will suggest making it a very bold color so it stands out and you know it's a flashy, bold, brilliant color that really stands out and we know, well, that's our cut path. So I now have my spot color created as cut contour. I'm going to apply that to the shapes. One method of applying that spot color would be by selecting our object and applying a stroke of that spot color. And when we do that, you'll see I have my stroke panel opened. When we do that, it does not have to be a great amount. A quarter point, half point is fine. We may pay special attention to align stroke to center, to inside, to outside. You do have these choices. But again, something as simple as a quarter point stroke is fine. Now that is an okay method to choose. And if I zoom up on that, I will be able to see my cut information for my cut shape, my stroke around that color, around that area. So I see my green stroke color, okay? Again, this could be something that is a little bit, maybe in my example, for me, it's a little hard to see. So I might say, well, I don't want to use a stroke. Instead, I'll go through the second method, and that's going to be filling the object. I'm going to fill the object with the cut contour spot color. Now, before I do that, remember what we're seeing is going to print. So essentially, I need to select my shapes, my graphics, and I need to duplicate them. And then to the duplicated set, I'm going to fill with my cut contour spot color. So I select my 4 shapes. I'll do a copy, I will deselect, and then I will do an edit paste in place. Okay. Again, I'll deselect. I want to be sure to select the very top object. When you're working with the full shape of the object and you're going to duplicate it or paste in place, you want to fill with the spot color for the cut contour designation, the cut tool type. You want that to be on the topmost graphic object. So I've selected the top. In this case, I'm going to fill with my cut contour color. Now I will deselect and show you that indeed they are all on their own top layer here. I will also go to my layers panel, see these shapes, and I will make a new layer specific for that cut contour. Go. And then I will move those objects physically into its own layer. Now, the purpose of this is twofold: organization, easy for me to turn on, turn off that layer and see my artwork file in the sense of designing and working with this data. The second reason is it's going to be on its own layer called cut contour, and back in cut server, when I manage this cutter, I will have a cut contour spot color designation here for that layer. It's going to associate that to that device. Okay, so back in Illustrator, I have everything I need. If this was not just a single cut shape, I'm going to do a cut shape right around these objects. If I needed more than one cut path, very simple, I just make another swatch and I give that spot color name and I associate some type of color representation to that. And it is a spot color. What's the name? Score through whatever type of cut designation you want to associate. Again, referencing this from our quick set and then having those shapes be filled, duplicate the shapes and fill them. So we can have multiple cut paths, multiple spot colors, and all of that information could be on its own layer, and we can build upon that very simply. I'll do a save as, just to the name here. I'm going to this in my samples folder. I've got a folder training images and cutting files. So I don't overwrite the original. I'll put today's date in here. I'll save this file out. Okay, now I've got that file created. As far as with the cut path specified, I'll go into my RIP and I'll bring that file in. So I'm going to go to open. I'll go to my training images folder. I'll bring in that file. And important points is we must make sure we're picking the proper quick set. This is going to be for our cutter. And now my file will come in. It's associating the graph type cutter. Again, the preview will be the print preview, not necessarily the cutter spot color. We shouldn't see that. That's not going to print. That's going to control the blade or the router of the cutter for that contour shape. I will send this to my printer, print now. Then I will go over to cut server. And in a few moments here, I'll see my cut shapes. Here are my files. And again, giving this designation for that cut contour, it's placed that information in the cut settings. And this is optional, completely optional, but this can automate your workflow. But just to say it's completely optional in how we specify the tooling based on the layer name. And then of course I associated those shapes to their own layer for that name. Now our print is completed. We'd walk that over to our cutter, feed that in the proper direction, move our optics to find the marks, and when it's ready, send this cut information to the GraphTech cutter by clicking on Cut Now. And that's going to write the file over to that directory. And the communication takes place, and we start to cut our file. So fairly simple workflow. Big keys to this is that our spot color name that we have is going to match the naming convention that we are identifying in our quick set for that particular cutter. And again, use cutter path prefix has all of these presets turned on. We can disable what we don't use or add other names that are not present in the list. And that information is going to pick up that data. It's going to be a spot color going through this quick set. It's going to know that it's special. It's not going to print. Instead, it's going to send that information over to our cut server to be sent consequently to the file cut device. So one more area I want to point out to you, controls and settings that we have. Under File, we have Manage Cutters. And in the Manage Cutters menu, if I scroll to my choice for GraphTech, I can configure and have some degree of settings and controls to adjust. Now, this is going to be specific to the cutter model. So we can see here, print the barcode, here's our size, which pattern type we want to work with. The mark X and Y margin will represent the edge of the sheet to where the mark prints. And then the image X and Y margin is the edge of the sheet to where the image starts. And again, we can control interval amounts and mark thickness. There's a few general controls in here. Every one of these different cutter models we see will have their own series of controls and cutter configuration settings. So you can explore these as you like for the devices you're working with and consequently get that bit of information. And then a last point to show you is if we double click our file or right click and go to job properties, we do this to our file with our cut path data. In a magenta preview, we can also see where that cut path information is going to be. And this is always going to be a magenta color. And it's just a quick preview to show you where that cut shape's going to be. You can see the cutter model here as well that we've chosen. If we do open this in Job Editor, we'd also see that magenta outline in Job Editor. And that's going to wrap up our cut information, our cut workflow. So if you have any other bits of information or questions, you can always take a look under My ONYX. We've got documentation and videos here for your reference. If you do not have a My ONYX account, when you log into My ONYX, there's the choice there to create a My ONYX account and set that up, and then you'll have access to documentation and to videos.